To invite Paul to address you. I was in a meeting about a week ago and someone said, I was in a meeting this morning and they were talking about Paul Polman and Unilever, and I said, in the last decade in business, you've not been able to have a meeting without somebody talking about Steve Jobs and Apple. And I genuinely believe that we're now in a time, and we will be seeing over the next decade, that you will not be able to have a meeting in business without somebody talking about Paul Polman and Unilever. And I think what Paul is doing to take one of the biggest businesses in the world and genuinely drive it to be more socially responsible, to commit that he wants to drive the revenue up, sure, but to halve the carbon footprint, to push the sustainable living plan. It's not only changing Unilever, it's changing the entire world of business. And there's a whole bunch of companies running along trying to catch up. But, I think this man, not only has been an amazing supporter of ours at One Young World, but what he's doing in the world of business is historic. So, Paul, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, David. You're basically too kind. I always wish my mother was here because he would tell you it's a big lie. Anyway, you're all talking about these social entrepreneurs. Many of you are, and the businesses you want to create. There's so much energy in this room. Why don't you put it in cans and start selling it? The world would be a better place. It's an enormous business you could make out of that. I'm also pleased being here for the third time, and I want to congratulate, obviously, David and Kate for what they have achieved with One Young World, because putting you all together is a force where 1 + 1 = 11. You need to use that force of all of you to see how you can not even do your own projects, which are wonderful, but how you can do the combined force of having One Young World meet and make that a force for change. Is a tremendous opportunity. It's actually my third time here that I'm here, and I'm more convinced than ever. And one of the reasons I fly in for this is more than ever that it's the young, obviously, that make the difference. And it's not only that we need to include the young in all of the things we're doing. We obviously need to spend far more time to empowering the younger generation to do things. So that's a big difference. 50% of the world's population outside of Europe and the US is actually below 25 years old. And anytime I go to any university anywhere around the world or talk with young people, and I have 3 sons myself that are your age, anytime I talk to any of them, they understand that although they are 50% of today's world, they're 100% of tomorrow's world. In Africa alone, in 2 generations, 50% of the world's youth will actually live in Africa. So we need to tap in and empower much more than we do today, this enormous force that you represent. And many of you are already obviously alluding to that. I've talked in 2011 when I was here about how we should be dealing with this volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, the VUCA world. Well, it's gotten even more volatile, so we need more people with the leadership skills to deal with that. For many CEOs, the average lifetime of a CEO, 3.5 years now, is becoming shorter and shorter because we have problems dealing with that. We need younger generations to help. In 2012, I came in Pittsburgh and we talked about power and hope and why it's so important to use that and give that hope and positive energy to the world to solve things. This is a world of opportunities, nothing else than that. A world we can all make better for everybody. And today, I wanted to just talk very simply about one word. The one word is called responsibility. It actually comes from the word respond, which is to answer. It's as simple as that. It is our responsibility to answer the call. And let me tell you, there is a call ringing out increasingly so across the world from many citizens. You can hear it in the US, you can hear it in Africa, you can hear it in Europe, you can hear it in Asia. From the squares of Egypt or Turkey to the streets, obviously, of Brazil lately and Spain. And the call is getting louder. This is what I try to tell CEOs as well. I just came from New York, where we had the General Assembly of the United Nations. In fact, David was there as well. I've been very fortunate to be part of the high-level panel for the Millennium Development Goals, simply trying to make this a better world for all. Graça Machel, who is actually Nelson Mandela's wife, is part of that panel, and we were very pleased to have her there as well. We've heard the call there from many people, the call for a better world, the call for a more sustainable world, the call for a more equitable world. I think, and that's why I'm so energized, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity right now to irreversibly eradicate poverty for all and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. We have that opportunity once and for all. And I believe personally that it has never been a better time to create a better world for all. But it needs the best of all of us, of people like yourselves. It's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And together we need to go. These issues that we're facing are so enormous, we simply can't do it alone. We need to create the bigger coalitions to do that together. Yes, with all of us. Stop the discussions of who's good or who's bad, or if we like business, or if NGOs are useless, or if governments are corrupt. Get the right people together. From NGOs, from civil society, from governments, from business, philanthropists, obviously the international institutions, and work together on the bigger projects in a different way to solve it. As simple as that. Become adults and stop being children. All of them committed to this one simple responsibility, to make this a better world for all. That's the minimum we can do in terms of dignity and respect for every citizen, especially for the ones that are not us, but the ones that don't have a chance to make their voices heard. In today's world, still, there are more unspoken, silent voices of the people that can't speak for themselves. I was very pleased to see one of the people who took that responsibility that really encapsulates that in the UN not long ago. And I'm talking about Malala Yousafzai. You probably know her. She's a girl that's only 16 years old. She grew up in the Swat Valley in Pakistan. Now, the Swat Valley is a pretty unexceptional place for anybody that has been there, except for one reason. In the last few years, all the girls there have been stopped from going to school by the Taliban. Mali could have accepted that, like many of the others, but she didn't. She refused. She argued, she agitated, she tweeted, she blogged. She appeared on TV stations. I saw her on BBC in the UK. Exactly the last year this time, she got shot. She got shot in the head, but the bullet, fortunately, didn't bring her down. Thankfully, she survived. And this year she stood up and gave what I thought was one of the most moving speeches that I've heard in the General Assembly. You can actually see it on YouTube. I encourage you to look at that. She said that she speaks not for herself, but so those without a voice can be heard. Providing a voice to the voiceless has, in a sense, always been, I believe, the guiding mission of the United Nations. And 13 years ago, when we started the original Millennium Development Goals, the United Nations made a historical commitment to halve poverty by 2015. In fact, we're well on our way to do that. Never have so many people lived out of poverty. Enormous progress has been made. Millions of families have gained access to clean water. Millions of people gained access to education. Millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. But we all know more than anybody else that there is still more to do. We still live in a world where too many people don't participate or don't get benefits. And that ultimately is a world that will be rejected. If too many people are excluded, they will not accept that. Increasingly, they have their opportunities to aggregate their voices and take action, and that is what you see. This world still carries very deep wounds, in my opinion. The wounds of poverty, the wounds of disease, the wounds of malnutrition. In fact, 2.6 billion people today still not having access to sanitation. And it's usually the young that suffer the most. 2 million children, as a result of lack of access to sanitation, don't even make it every year to their 5th anniversary. 800 million people plus still go to bed hungry every day, not knowing if they wake up the next day. As a result, 170 million stunted children, forever scarred to be full participants in the economic process. Nearly 1 billion people still lack access to clean water. 1.4 million children die a year as a result of that. And I'm not even talking about the 22,000 children that die every day simply due to poverty or living in areas of conflict. These are no bare statistics. These are real life. And these are not us. These are the voices of the unknown, unheard. Many people in the world are still suffering. Take sub-Sahara Africa, or take here Johannesburg, just the city ourselves. 1 in 5 people still in Johannesburg lives in abject poverty. Of course, there's progress, as I said, but the progress simply isn't quick enough. It's Nelson Mandela who said, if we walk up one great hill, we only look up and see another great hill to climb. It's obviously a long road to freedom. But these problems we see here in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, in China, and many other places are symptomatic of, I think, deeper problems. The world actually has tipped on the wrong axis. Take, for example, the issue of food security. It is just mind-boggling to me that we, all intelligent people, supposedly the most intelligent species, even today, 1 billion people nearly going to bed hungry, not knowing if they wake up the next day. Then in between, we're able to waste about $750 billion of food, 30% of the total food production, to then on the other side have 1.2 billion people be obese and obeser, becoming one of the biggest epidemics in the world, which is diabetes too. If we can't figure out how to make the system work for all, who can? And I'm not even talking about the food waste using up 30% of the world landmass that is wasted, or the effects on the lack of water as a result of CO2 and many of the other things. Take the issue of resource use. How can we live in a world that 1.2 billion people use 75% of the world's resources, whilst these voiceless bottom 1 billion people only use 1%? Think about what we're up against if another 2 billion people enter this world. Or take the issue of inequality, where we still have over 2.5 billion people in this world living of less than $2.50 a day. We can't go on like this. We can't keep sapping these energies and resources of the Mother Earth. We can't keep going on letting people go to bed hungry. We can't keep on depriving people of sanitation or right to education. That is our call. That is our responsibility. Although these people are voiceless, we have to answer. And you're in a position to do that. Now let me give you one secret, which is a known fact, by the way. That is that the political environment is more difficult than it has ever been. Countries were designed to defend their borders, and politicians are elected by their local constituents. Increasingly more focused on the short term as these challenges arise to be re-elected. Unfortunately, the system isn't designed to attack many of these global problems that require that interdependence. But yet, you are global. Politicians can't function. They are not leaders if they don't have people behind them. You have the power to elect them. You have the power to make them the leaders they need to be, with your voices, with your responsibility. Without this, they cannot act. We see the same with the global institutions. The world has become very complex. Financial world, technology, enormously interconnected. And many of the institutions we see, we talked a little bit this morning about the G8 or the G20, they're frankly not representing the total world anymore, and they're not adapted to the challenges that I've just laid out in front of you. That's why we don't get Doha rounds. That's why we don't get climate change agreements. That's why we don't tackle the issues of poverty. Now, one of the reasons, besides running a small grocery store called Unilever, I decided to be part of the high-level panel because it's the only opportunity we have with the Millennium Development Goals, not only to eradicate poverty once and for all irreversibly, but actually to put a moral framework in place for all of us, a framework of dignity and respect for the voices that can be heard, but most importantly, for the unheard voices. In the absence of governments or institutions rising to the challenge. But it needs you. It needs you. And it needs companies as well, obviously, that I represent. Capitalism has brought a lot of good to this world. We don't have to be ashamed of that. We have lifted many people out of poverty. I wouldn't be standing here were it not for capitalism. I had a chance in my own home country, the Netherlands, to go to school for free. My father worked in a factory. We had 6 children. They wouldn't have been able to afford education. But because of globalization, because of lifting people out of poverty, we've benefited from that. What rights do we have to deprive that to these other bottom of the pyramid billions that are still there? So in the rainforest, the food chains that we have, the financial markets that we have, the people not taking care of our scarce resources, we have to call them to responsibility. We have to make them part of answering the call of the unheard. Capitalism has worked to some extent, but I think the 2008 crisis that we've had has made a lot of people realize that it has come at an enormous cost. Yes, undoubtedly lifted all these people out of poverty, but enormous levels of government debt, enormous levels of private debt, over-consumerism of scarce resources that we don't have enough of, and leaving too many people behind. That's not the world we want to live in. Some people call about the invisible hand taking care of it, but more and more it looks like an iron fist that is squeezing the last drop of lemon out of this earth. And by the way, killing by doing that the future itself. So rise up against these political systems that are still made, the institutions or companies that don't behave responsibly. And let's together take that responsibility and answer the call. We must empower the leaders, young or old, that are here. We must empower them to help us all. We must empower them by our voices and our supports to help them make this world a better place for all. And I believe we can do that. Last week you saw the report on the panel on climate change. Temperatures are rising. Yes, it is man-made. And again, it's the poor that suffer most. When you have Hurricane Sandy hitting the New York area of the East Coast, you know, the Americans have great stories and little anecdotes how they had to walk the stairs instead of taking the elevator. But in 1 or 2 weeks' time, everything is fine again. Haiti is put back another year or two. Or when you see the effects of the flood in Jakarta or North India, claiming hundreds, if not thousands of lives. These people are put back by years. It affects the poor far more than anybody else. Do we ignore it, or do we take responsibility? People's patience has been tested for way too long. Anger is simmering below the surface. That's why you see all these movements. People don't go to the streets by 1 million or plus because a bus fare goes up in Brazil. They're fed up with corruption. People don't go to a square, how sad it may be, because they cut a few trees. They want secular states. People don't go to the square in Egypt because they want to have a party. They want to have an opportunity for all and an inclusive growth. People increasingly all around the world, and especially the young, are able to aggregate their voices and make their voices heard. And that is an enormous power. Now, the longer we leave to exercise the power, the more we fail, and the more dear the implications will be. We cannot afford to have that, obviously, and that's why I need your help. I need your help especially because it's your future more than anything else, and we are there to help you make that a future for all. I like it even more because you're all digitally savvy, and I believe the answer actually is in technology and social media more than ever. You've seen that with the Arab Spring. We organize on Facebook, we communicate with each other on Twitter, and we show the world what we do on YouTube. An enormous force is happening. When we did the Dove Sketches, which is a brand that stands for women's self-esteem, only 4% of women have their own self-esteem or feel they're beautiful, because every time they open a magazine or switch on television, it's about buttocks, it's about a facelift, it's about getting another operation. How does that make you feel? Dove will help you. We created the Dove Sketches. 160 million people watched that. The most watched YouTube video of a brand, actually. Why? Because it serves a social purpose. Now, if that brand can get 160 million people, we should be able to create movements for good together of 1 billion voices or more. And that is obviously something very exciting if we're going to do this. There are enormous networks coming around of young people. Obviously, One Young World is one of the most important ones, but you have the Global Shakers, you have the Ashoka Fellows, there's the We Day that is started by Mark Kielberg, the G20 Young organization, Nick in the UK, who has an organization called Restless, obviously Jeremy Gilly, who was last year with you on Peace One Day. These are young people movements. If we can aggregate these voices and do it together, we can change this world for the better for all. Now, we are coming to a point that the cost of inaction, this is where business, by the way, should get very interested, because the cost of inaction is bigger now than the cost of action. The consumer goods industry, which I represent, by not taking action on climate change or running out of scarce resources, could see all of its profits disappear in a few decades' time. You know, I talked about the food security. We're wasting $750 billion a year in the supply chain on food. It only takes $80 billion a year to feed the people that are now going to bed hungry. You look at the world itself and the violence that is there. We're spending $9.6 trillion. That's 11% on the gross national product to deal with issues of violence in the world. If we could reduce that expenditure by half, just think about that. Reduce violence by half. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? Now, with that money, we could repay all the debts of the developing world. We could provide enough money for the European Stability Mechanism to work once and for all. We could fund additional amounts required to achieve the annual cost of the Millennium Development Goals and eradicate poverty once and for all. It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Our responsibility, your responsibility as leaders, wherever you are, if you're in business or if you're in government, you have an enormous responsibility to draw the future closer and to make the present reality simply a thing of the past. There's been no better time to create a better world. Now, the issues of poverty, food security, climate change, again, once more, are very complex. And they are too complex for any individual company or individual person to tackle alone. That's why we together have to answer this call. It's the kind of partnership that we talk about with the Millennium Development Goals moving forward, based on mutual respect and trust, based on putting the interest of the common good ahead of your own interest, based on fighting for the voices of the unheard. That's the minimum that we can expect. It's the minimum that we owe others, the dignity and respect that everybody deserves. And we have an opportunity to make that difference. We have an opportunity to work together to eradicate poverty once and for all. Take the initiative of Grow Africa, where industry, NGOs, and governments went together to set up sustainable supply chains around smallhold farmers, and yes, around women and land rights and some of the other issues, to make Africa once and again and once and for all self-sufficient on food. Or take the movement on Tropical Forest Alliance. The deforestation is about 20% of the global warming, much driven by food. Industry getting together with governments now to hopefully get rid of the illegal deforestation that is haunting us and hitting this world in many areas. So partnerships are emerging. And at the high-level panel, as we were working on the future we want, we've also seen the power of these partnerships in many other areas, be it in health, or be it in education, be it in child poverty alleviation, in food security, maternal health, and I could go on like this. In fact, when we were working on the panel in the last 2 years, we got about 10% of the global GDP of companies to respond and to want to participate very actively. Don't worry about not everybody participating. Get the right people on board and make the change. I've come to believe that it only takes 30 of something. 30 people or 30 institutions or 30 NGOs with 30 businesses, but it only takes about 30 people to get to a tipping point. You know, I did once a study on all the public companies not long ago as we worked for this partnership conference. And in fact, it surprised me, but on the stock exchange from all over the world, there are only about 60,000 companies. I know there are private companies, there are social enterprises that are not on the stock exchange, but there are 60,000 companies listed on the stock exchange that make up the world's capital if you want to. Only 1,000 of those make up half of it. So if we get these 1,000 companies, Unilever one of them, to really be that force for good, you can get to a tipping point. Only 100 companies influence 25% of many of the raw materials. For us, it's palm oil, or for us, it's tea, being big producers of those brands with things like Lipton or our margarine business. So if you get Unilever to change, let's say to sustainable tea, you can change the world. You get these tipping points. So I call that the rule of 30. It was enormous to see how many people responded to the call for a better world. In fact, Willis is here in the audience, my friend from Kenya. He's fighting enormously to get the young involved on hygiene in Africa. We got so many voices to participate, about 20 million people. That alone gave me the energy and determination to keep working on this. There is a tipping point happening if we take that responsibility. We created a website. Last week we were there to give some prizes to people in New York. It is called The World We Want. In a few weeks' time we got 1 million, and again it were young people, 1 million people to come to this website to say what world they wanted. Obviously they wanted jobs, obviously they wanted education, but obviously they wanted good governance and rule of law, but they also wanted sustainable and equitable growth. Business itself has to step up. That's why I'm here as well. Not to apologize at all. I think we just need to get the right business leaders together to be that drive for change. This is a wonderful moment that we can get an opportunity to lead and to show what responsible business can do. We have to be part of the solution. Business cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. That's very important, to take that responsibility and become that positive force for good we talked about. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I see you as this new generation of leaders. You are the men and women who instinctively understand the need to do things differently. You also understand it's your future, by the way. You understand that the only legitimate model, including for businesses, is one that contributes to society rather than takes. We had a discussion on CSR or philanthropy. They're all fine, but that's not enough anymore. Even shared business models, I was saying to the Unilever people yesterday, is not enough anymore. Business cannot just say we do something positive or we do something less bad, or look at page 2 of the annual report and we provided sliding doors or wheelchairs. They have to become a force for good to actually reverse some of the things. If there's shortage of food, you have to solve that. Shortage of hygiene, you have to solve that. Shortage of educational access, you have to solve that. You have to become a net positive contributor. That's why we launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. The Unilever Sustainable Living Plan is nothing else to say, how can we grow in this world where many people need to be lifted out of poverty, where 2 billion people still come? How can we grow, but grow in a way that we can honestly look everybody in the eye and say, we're making a positive impact. We're not stealing anymore from this world. We're not stealing the scarce resources, or we're not stealing your money to give it to a few. We're making this a better world for all. And as we do this, I am convinced that as you give, you will be able to receive more and have a more successful model of your business as well. That's why we've placed at the center of our business many of these social problems, because it happens to touch a lot of our brands. Issues like food security or sanitation or health obviously touch rightly so our brands. Now, many people, as you say, talk a good talk. But you have to get now to the point that we walk a good walk. This world is short on actions and long on words. And the key thing is that you help businesses, again, with the power of your wallet, with the power of the aggregation of your voice, to actually become that force for good. It was Stephen Covey who said in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's an interesting book to read if you haven't read that. But one of the things he said in that book is, you cannot talk yourself out of things you've behaved yourself into. You cannot talk yourself out of things you've behaved yourself into. We have behaved ourselves into some serious challenges. Some of the businesses have behaved themselves into some serious lack of trust and respect. They cannot talk themselves out of that. They have to behave themselves out of that. If they do, they will be embraced. If they don't, I hope they will be rejected. I'm very glad that we have here about 60 or 65 wonderful people from Unilever that are part of this conference. Not only because you're here and others from other companies, but you need critical mass within companies like ours. We know how difficult it is. We know you're up against a lot of the conventions of change and how much you have resistance to any change you do. That's why you need to create critical mass. That's why we have 65 wonderful people here, and last year, the year before, it's starting to become a critical mass also within our company. They've come up with challenges, they've come up with ideas, everything is being implemented there. It's actually been positive. And sometimes they're small actions, but small actions combined with all of us, I can assure you, make big differences. So in the last 4 years, we've put this business model in place and simply said, how can we turn this to a positive model? How can we make all of our agriculturally based materials sustainable? How can we reach 1 billion people and improve their nutrition and well-being using the scale of a company like ours that has 2 billion consumers a day or are 7 out of 10 households? How can we create more smallhold farmers? 2 million already on our payroll, directly or indirectly. How can we add another 500,000 to this? We call it the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. But more importantly, we said, how can we use our brands increasingly as a force for good? If we have Dove, how can it stand for women's self-esteem? If we have Knorr, how can we make it sustainable farming? If we have Ben & Jerry's, how can we make that an activist brand to have a nuclear-free world? If we have Domestos, how can we create more toilets in this world? And look at Lifebuoy on the issue of sanitation. Just have a look at this film for 2 seconds, and it says it all, and then I'll wrap up.
மகன் வளருகிறான் உள்ளங்களிலே இன்பம் பெருகிட மனதில் நிறைகின்றான் மனதில் நிறைகின்றான் தாயும் தந்தையும் விரும்புவதெல்லாம் ஒன்னேதானுங்க ஐயா ஒன்னேதானுங்க கண்ணுக்கு கண்ணான தான் பெத்த பிள்ளை துள்ளி விளையாடியே மனதை மகிழச் செய்யணுங்க மகிழச் செய்யணுங்க மகிழச் செய்யணுங்க தெய்வம் தந்த செல்வமையா நான் பெற்ற செல்வமையா ஆரோக்கியமும் அறிவும் பெற்று வளர்ந்துட்டானையா மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோமையா நாமே மனம் மகிழ்ந்தோமையா இந்த மகிழ்ச்சியின் வேதனை எதுவும் மறந்திடும் ஐயா ஐயா நாளொரு மேனியும் பொழுதொரு வண்ணம் என் மகன் வளருகிறான் உள்ளங்களிலே இன்பம் பெருகிட மனதில் நிறைகின்றான் மனதில் நிறைகின்றான்
मेरा बच्चा 5 साल का हो गया।
इतना सब 5 साल में कौन सी बड़ी बात है?
बड़ी बात है मैडम, ये गुंडापा का पहला बच्चा है जो 5 साल की उम्र तक पहुंचा है।
क्या?
I don't know about you, but I've seen it many times, and any time I see that, I just get a little lump in my throat or a tear in my eye, because that's what we do for a living, and I'm proud of it. You know, we've cut by half the number of people dying, the number of children dying by diarrhea and pneumonia just in the last few years when we created Global Hand Washing Day. October 15th now in the UN is Global Hand Washing Day. 1.1 million children's lives have been saved as a result of that. Probably the lowest cost action of sanitation, just by washing your hands. but we shouldn't celebrate. Yet today, even today, still 3,000 children under the age of 5 still die every year of diarrhea. And we're sitting there just reporting the statistics. 3,000 children a day is the equivalent of 47 Boeing 407s full of children crashing to the earth every day. What would we do if one Boeing 747 full of children really would crash to earth? We'd fix all the Boeings for the rest of our lives. We'd fix the problem right away. There are 40 today. Aren't we able to solve that? I came from Kenya yesterday night late because I wanted to be in Kenya. We have our people working there. Some of them have gone through dramatic experiences as a result of something we should never accept. I was very unfortunate myself to be stuck in Mumbai in the hotel when that happened. So I know what these people went through. The cost of failure to society is very high. I simply wanted to give them the support. We were very pleased to go to the Kilimianso school there in Nairobi to do hand washing. A school of 1,200 kids. They all get beyond the age of 5 because they have the access to hygiene and sanitation. And they all will be great leaders to make Kenya even a better and more prosperous country for all. So let's use that force, in this case with hand washing, to ensure, and we've made this commitment as a company, to reach another 600,000 children, to give them that opportunity to get to the age of 5 or beyond. Now that's good for business. We sell more soap, we do that in a sustainable way. We try to do that in a profitable way so that we can go to schools and do hand washing and invest in these programs and reach more children. And you know what? That's why soap was invented in the first place. When we invented it in Victorian Britain, only 1 out of 2 babies made it past the year of 1 because the problem of hygiene was very severe there. So what's wrong with that? And what's wrong with doing that in a sustainable way? The force of business can be very good if it is a force for good. And there's nothing wrong to have that profit also with it, because then you don't depend on others. You don't depend on European governments running out of debt or cutting off your funds, or the US government not giving it to you anymore. You can make sustainable models that reach more people and improve this world faster. Your generation, to be honest, when you look at all these things, has every right to be angry. There is, when you make these problems that we have here, problems of the past, on that road to changing it, you will discover a lot of cynicism, a lot of doubt, a lot of people telling you you can't make this a better world for all. I always say to myself, the cynics is actually the lowest form of taking responsibility. Those people don't answer the call. You can. You have an opportunity to do that. And if you feel angry about the world that we're giving you, I'm actually glad you do. I'm only asking you because that anger will create that energy, and I'm only asking you channel that energy, obviously in the positive, not the negative direction. Because then it will get us where we want to be. It gives you the change that we need to make. We know the answers. Never ever have we been so forewarned about the things we're facing, but also never ever have we been so forearmed with the tools to do something about it. And you can spearhead this change that is needed. You have the courage. You have the confidence. You have the conviction. You have the energy. You have the enthusiasm to make a difference. And history shows that that is true. I don't have to go back too far. But in the 60s, it was the young that rose up against the war in Vietnam. In the 70s, you had some college dropouts like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates driving a new revolution. In the 80s, it was again the young who crushed the communism in Central and Eastern Europe. And now we have an opportunity to use the young to eradicate poverty once and for all. And Unilever, and I hope many other companies, will be alongside you, working with the smallhold farmers, working with the women, working with the children to get them to wash their hands, providing the toilets so girls can go to school, using our scale to transform markets. And of course, there will be doubters and cynics along the way. There will be the press writing about a bad quarter, There will be people in Wall Street wanting to have more profit, but we're not going to be budged by that. We're going to be driven by a higher moral and ethical value than just these short-term wins. It's time to turn back to it of doing what we're supposed to do. Work for the greater good, putting the interest of others ahead of our own. But also empowering your politicians and forcing your politicians to take that same responsible path. Become involved in politics. Make your voices heard, especially now with the Millennium Development Goals. We're going into a period of about 900 days left that our politicians have to decide what the Millennium Development Goals are going to be for 2015 onwards. And they want to hear from you. The significance of the Occupy Wall Street movement was not in what it was, but it is the significance of these movements is in the direction that the people are trying to point us to. Don't just occupy the empty spaces of noise and critics. Occupy the spaces of change and improvement. Get involved. Join the parties. Aggregate your voices. It's your responsibility, once more, to answer the call. Everyone and all of us. I saw a quote from an African poet not long ago. And I'll read the quote. On such a day, who would dare think of dying? So much freedom means that we'll swear we'll postpone dying until the morning after. Now, the poet who wrote this was from Ghana. His name was Kofi Awunor. He was actually born in 1935. The reason I picked up that quote was actually yesterday when I was in Kenya. He's no longer alive. He actually died 2 weeks ago. He was one of these innocent people that was shot by these Somalian terrorists in the Westgate shopping center. So let's release the energy of all of us, young people, in body, or I hope also in spirit. That's why I include myself. There's a window for action now. There's never been a better time to make this world a better place. Respond to the calling. Thank you very much for your time.